So let's go to File, New, and I'm using Flash CS6. Now I'm going to do this one in ActionScript 2.0 because that's something we've been discussing in our class. It's a little bit easier to use, and it requires less coding. Really, it's just kind of an easy way out. Now, width and height, that's up to you. What size do you want your application to be? How many pixels do you want it to take up? We're going to leave this at 550 by 400. That's a rather small area on the screen, but for our purposes now, it'll be okay. Frame rate 24, we'll leave that as is. Background color, we'll leave that as is. Just make sure you're clicking on ActionScript 2.0 and go ahead and press OK. So here's your empty stage. This is where you're going to start your work. And here we're going to start to build up the layers. So first thing, just like design-wise, let's just make a background. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so I can see my full stage. So that's my full stage. Obviously, I'm looking at it at 50%. It'll be bigger once it gets published. It'll be the actual size. But I'm going to go over now to my tools, and I'm going to go ahead and grab a tool so I can add some color to this background. Now I'm going to do that by grabbing a rectangle tool and drawing a rectangle across the stage. So first default color in my case was black, which is not really what I want. I'd like to put a gradient in there. So what I'm going to do is now go over to my swatches. I'm also going to select what I just drew by dragging the black arrow around what I just drew so it's selected. You'll see it's selected because of all those little points. I'm going to go over to swatches, and I'm actually going to go ahead and pick the gradient here, the white to black gradient. Now that's cool, but I'd like it to go in another direction, so I'm going to go ahead and edit the gradient. And the gradient editor is hiding over here somewhere. Yep, there it is, under the free transform tool, gradient transform tool. You could use the shortcut letter F for that. And you'll notice there's this little arrow. That kind of tells you how wide or how fast, I guess I should say, the gradient is going to blend. So if you pull it out, it's a really soft gradient. If you pull it in, it's a really tight gradient. So actually soft sounds good. And then over here I can rotate it, so I'm going to rotate it so that it goes from top to bottom. And if I like that, that's cool, and if not, I could go back to swatches and control the gradient's color. Here's white and here's black. I'm actually going to double click on black and make that a lighter gray. So it's a very subtle gradient. You might even be thinking that's too subtle, actually, so I'll bump it up a little bit darker. That's cool. So this image that I just created, or I should say this object that I just created, is on layer 1. This is the background layer for my app. So I'm going to go ahead and call this background layer. Now, of course, you start with a background in Flash anyway. There's always a background to your stage, but we're adding a gradient here. That's why we're going ahead and adding a layer there. Okay, so now that we've got the background layer, let's make another layer on top of that. And this layer, I'm going to go ahead and call it title. Now I'm going to put a title on here to tell people, what it is that I'm working on. You'll notice I just shrank the size of my timeline a little bit so I could see my canvas a little bit better. Bump this up back to 100% in the view, so we're looking at this at 100% now. Now, one thing I like to do is turn on rulers so that I can use the rulers to help me, put things in the right place. So I went to View, Rulers, to turn on the rulers. Now I'm going to grab my black arrow, and I'm going to go ahead and decide that I'd like my title to come down and maybe take up about 50 pixels at the top of the screen. Then I'm going to grab my text tool, and I'm going to click and drag a text box. And then I could call this is going to be the title of my lesson. So this will lesson title. Okay. Now I'm going to grab my black arrow, move the lesson title, and line it up there with the line. And if I go into properties now, since I'm selecting this box that represents the text that I'm controlling, you'll see that I have the ability to change stuff down here. So I can decide what kind of text I want to use, how I want the text to apply to the page. I'm using classic text, TLF text. We can get into that. That's a new thing that Flash has in this new version. We'll just leave it on classic. Family, I'm using Futura because I think it's a cool font, but you know what, to be safe, you probably want to use a font that would load on everybody's computer, like Arial. I tend to like fancy fonts because they just look better. So actually, you could choose Arial, but I'm actually going to probably stick with Futura because I think it's pretty. And then we can, play with other settings, the size and all that stuff. Here we can start to decide whether or not we want the the text to have subscripts or other things like the kerning, the space between the letters. We don't need to really worry about that. What I'm going to do, though, is definitely center it. That just makes my life a little easier. And also, since I've centered the text inside the box, I could also go to Window, Align, make this a little smaller, put it on my stage so I can look at it. And I can align this object, this text object, to the stage by checking here, and then use one of the buttons to make it do what I want. So I want it to be aligned horizontally, so it's perfectly aligned there. And I can actually now use my arrow keys on my keyboard and bring it down so it's right there on the line where I wanted it. Cool. So that's going to be my title for my project, whatever it is. So let's say I'm teaching a lesson on mitosis or on American history. You know, this is the title, whatever you're going to put up there. Then you'll want to make another layer. In this layer, this is where you could maybe start to create an introduction for your lessons text area. So I'm going to go ahead and use my guidelines again, drag another guideline, drag it down to like 100. And now again, I'm just kind of guessing with these guidelines, no big deal where you put them, but I'm just going to go ahead and say that I'm going to put all the text within that and then give myself maybe, yeah, like another 50 or so pixels from the bottom of the screen. And I'll make a text box that fits in there. So I'll grab Type Tool and make a text box. And you know what, to be clean, I'm also going to give myself a 50 pixel border on each end. I'll grab my Type Tool and I'm going to drag out. So this is where I can put introduction to the lesson and other info, or give instructions to your students. Okay, so that's cool. That would be where I would put that. Now the other thing we'll want to have, I'm going to drag this down so I can put it within that box like I was planning on. I can use Align to align it center so it's nice and neat. The other thing I want to do is have buttons so that students can go to different sections of the lesson. So, you know, I introduce what this site is for, and then I give the students options to go to different places. So now that those are all done, I'm actually going to lock them so I don't mess them up. That's one thing you want to get in the habit of, is locking the layers that you worked on and just leave them locked. I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, and this new layer, I'm going to call this buttons. Now we need to create buttons. Now the easiest way to create buttons is actually just to go ahead and insert a new symbol, create a new symbol. So I'm going to go up to the top of the screen and choose Insert and choose New Symbol. It gives me the Create New Symbol window, and then I get to choose from the type that this is going to be a button. And for your naming conventions, eventually when we get into the scripting, you want to avoid spaces in the names and any weird like punctuation characters, so just keep it simple. So we'll go ahead and call this, let's just call it Home ETN, so Home Button. And nerds out there will probably tell you to use caps in between your words. It's a good way to help you when you're writing your tags or whatever, so you don't make mistakes with your coding. So you see I'm typing in Home, capital B, TN. So button is the name that will remind me that this is a button. So I press OK. This new screen that you've entered now, don't get confused, you're actually still in your project. Your project is Scene 1. And you'll notice that now we're in Home Button. So we're just editing the Home button, but we're still in our own project. It's still called Scene 1. If we go back to Scene 1, this is just where we were. If I wanted to go back to the button, if you go to your library, get rid of a line for a second, there's that button that we just made. So when we make a new button, it takes us to the button screen so we can edit the button itself. So I'll double click that. Here I am back at the button. Now one thing I can do here just to help myself and make sure I design this correctly is I can turn on the grid. So View, Grid, Show Grid. There it is. And I'm going to go ahead and make a very simple button. I'm going to get a, let's see, I can do it with an oval or any kind of tool that you want. But yeah, we'll do the rectangle. And we're going to drag out a rectangle. So there is my rectangle. And then for color, I'll make this simple, so I'll give it a fill. I'm selecting it first so I can edit it, going into my swatches, and let's just say that we want to have blue buttons. So there's a blue button. And then I'm going to also use Align again, Window Align, to align it so that it's right in the center. I always like things to be centered. So Align horizontal, align vertical. Perfect. So this is the color of the button. So I'll call this button color. Okay? And as the button changes states, you'll want it to change colors. So to copy the blue state over to the over, I'm going to right click and over and do insert keyframe. That'll copy the blue frame and put it in the over frame. So copy the keyframe beforehand and just put it right into over, which is cool. But when people hover over my button, that's what the over stands for, I want it to change colors so they know that the button's working. So I'll go back to my swatches here, and let's go ahead and change that to yellow. Okay, again, this is not the most beautiful button or the most beautiful site we're creating. We're just actually getting to the basics, real basics here. So there's over. So when people are looking at the button, it's blue. When they're not touching it, when their mouse is over, it turns yellow. And maybe we want something to happen when they press, especially if you're working with younger students or students with maybe visual specialties. They might need that reinforcement. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click and down and insert another keyframe. That again copies the yellow over, and then go to swatches and hit red. So now when no one's touching it, the button's blue, then it becomes yellow when they're over it, and then when I click down, it turns red. Now the hit state, funny enough, in these newer versions of Flash, we don't actually need to draw anything there because it'll just default to whatever the last image is. And what hit means is this is the area that defines the clickable part of the button. So since there's nothing in hit, it's just going to default to whatever was in down, which is the red text. But just to be extra safe, to be an extra nerd, I'm going to right-click in here and do an insert keyframe, and it'll just copy the red over to hit. The color doesn't matter. This just lets Flash know that if I'm anywhere inside this area, the button's going to work. If you're working with little kids, or again, maybe students who have some specialties that they need a bigger space to click, you can actually make the hit size bigger than the button so that the students can get to it a little quicker. Okay, so that's cool. Button color's done. I should have some text on here though, so I'm actually going to make a new layer while I'm in my button. Don't be afraid of making new layers in your button. It's totally fine. It's totally easy too. You just make a new layer. And then you're going to lock the button color layers because those are done. And in here, this is where I want to type in what the button's going to stand for. What's the purpose of this button? So in layer 2, I'll go ahead and call this button text. And then I'm going to grab my text tool, and let's say, we said this is going to be the home button, right? So I'm going to type in home. And again, I'll align that, make everything nice and neat. And instead of red, because we have a red button, I probably, excuse me, the align tab just kind of slammed into the other toolbars. That's one thing you should know about also, by the way. Any of these toolbars, as you move them around, anytime you see that blue line that pops up, that means it's going to stick itself into the workspace, which made a mess a second ago. But I took it out, so it's not a big deal. Anyway, let's go with black. Again, anyone who knows color theory right now is probably mad at me because we probably should have thought about our colors a little bit more beforehand, but for the purpose of this lesson, it's just going to work. So that's just going to work. Okay. So I've got the button done. And actually, I can't stand it, so I'm going to change that blue to another color. How would I do that? Well, I would lock the text layer because that's done. Unlock the blue. Select the blue. And let's make that a lighter blue. And then it'll be easier to read. Much better. That's fine. Okay, cool. Now you'll notice that when you added the text, it went across all of the keyframes. And that's because when you had all these other keyframes made, it defaulted to put the information all the way across, which is totally fine. It's not going to hurt anybody. The button's going to work. So now the button's done. So we're going to go back to scene 1. Here's scene 1. And right now we should probably save our work so we don't lose all the hard work we've done so far. So I'm going to do File, Save As, and onto my desktop here, just going to go ahead and save this as Flash Project, for lack of a better name. And then now I can drag this button and lay it down right there on my document. Remember, we made a new layer for buttons, so that's cool. I'm going to drag it over. There it is. I'm going to bring it down with my arrow keys. So let's say this button would take them back to the same page, which is, again, kind of redundant, but eventually we'll probably get rid of this anyway. We'll probably put another button. But the cool part about doing this is that once you make one button, you can duplicate that. So I can right-click on the button and choose Duplicate, and it makes a copy. And Well, let's actually call it page 1. That makes more sense because that would be more relevant to all of you. We'll call it page 1 button. So this will be the first place we want them to go to. And press OK. Now we double click in our library where we just made the new page 1 button. And all we got to do is swap out that text. So we make sure the button text layer is open. Grab our type tool. We'll make them write page 1. That makes sense. Go back to scene 1. And then we can drag the page 1 button down. And then tab it over. You don't want your buttons to overlap. That's when things get weird. And this guy, we might want it to be centered right in the center, so that's perfect. Then I'm going to go ahead and make another duplicate of the page 1 button by right-clicking in the library. Right-click, duplicate, and we'll call this page 2 button. Oop, and I didn't do my caps, and I did do my caps sometimes. Be careful, like I made a boo-boo there when I typed the first button. It also should have had a B. So I'm just going to change it to a capital B. Now, why is that a big deal? It's not. It's a big deal later when we start to do our coding in case we make any errors in our typing. So here's this new page button. Double click on that guy, grab your type tool, go ahead and change that to page 2. Quick and easy. Go back to scene 1, and we'll drag page 2 down. I'm using my arrow keys. Sometimes the arrow keys are a lot better for doing this kind of stuff than doing anything else. And we need to move things here and there and there. Okay, cool. So we have a lesson title. We've got our buttons. I think our lesson title should be a little heavier, don't you think? Judging by the font, just to make this a little bit more balanced. I'm going to go to my title, unlock it, and you know what? I'm going to do it in all caps. I think it'll look a little bit more clean. A little bit more even. Yeah, it looks a little bit more even. Even go ahead and make this a little bit bigger if I wanted to. Highlight the type, go into properties. Let's bump up the font. I mean, that's huge, but that's fine. Put it on the line. Okay, cool. We've got the title of our lesson. This is where the instructions are. Here are some buttons. Now again, this is, rather simple. You're going to do more things when you build this. Now what happens is we've got to think about the timeline. So right now, if I save this and I test the movie, control test movie, test, it'll play the movie. There it is. Now the buttons work, awesome, but when you click on them, they don't go anywhere. Well, that's expected because we didn't add any actions to them. So what we might want now is we might want this to click somewhere. We want to be able to click the buttons and go to a location. So we want to give them some actions. We want to give them some life. Okay? So how do we do that? Well, since we're using ActionScript 2.0, remember we started with that in the beginning. That's the important key. We're going to use behaviors to add the controls to these buttons. But before we even get there, we have to make a page 1 or make a page 2 so that we can go to that location, right? Now, in terms of Flash, if you remember, everything works at 24 frames a second. So when this project starts, we can have a whole second just with animation to just get this thing rolling. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to go over to frame 24, drag my mouse down, click and drag down. That'll select multiple frames. And I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to insert a keyframe. That's going to spread all those frames that you see all the way across. Bam. Okay? So now the animation looks like this, which you're probably thinking, okay, that's totally boring. There's a second of nothing. Well, you could animate this if you wanted now selectively. For example, I could click on the lesson here in frame 24. That's where I want it to be there. That's cool. But I could drag over to frame 1. See how I'm selecting on frame 1? And I can take the title, and maybe I want the title to come up from the top of the screen and kind of drop down. So right now, in frame 1, it's outside of the screen, and then all of a sudden in frame 24, it pops in. Now, you could animate it like that. If I was to animate that, you would see it just literally pop in really fast. See? See how just popping in, it's like flashing? The reason it's flashing in only that little quick second is because the animation right now is playing in a loop. So it's going nothing, 1 second, nothing, 1 second, nothing. And I shouldn't even say 1 second, I should say 1/24 of a second. So that's weird, we want it to stop. And also it'd be cool if it animated. So what I'm gonna do from the place here, where it's outside of the screen, and where it jumps to the top of the line, I'm gonna click anywhere in between there, and I'm gonna use a classic tween. Now the reason we're using classic tweens is, again, This goes out to the students in my class right now who were using ActionScript 2.0. It just kind of makes things a little bit easier. So I'm just going to choose Classic Tween. You'll see the arrow between the two now. So now, if I was to press Enter to test it, the lesson title pops right in. Then I could do the same for the text area. I could lock this, open that, and I could decide that the text in frame 1, maybe that lives outside the screen too. So I'm holding Shift as I drag. I'm going to zoom out too. Holding Shift as I drag so it stays at a solid line, so it stays in an even line. And again, in between here, right click, and we're going to go ahead and insert a Classic Tween. So now the title will come down and that will pop in, right? So that's what's going to happen. If we test this, and that looks like my battery's about to run out. If we test this, it looks cool, but it only lasts for a second because we haven't told it to stop. So now we need to add our first action. Go ahead and we're going to make a new layer here. I'm going to call this Actions. And we're going to add an action. Now we want to add an action just on frame 24. We want it to stop once the two words have landed in the correct place. So we do a right click in here and we insert a blank keyframe. So there's an empty space on the Actions layer on the 24th frame. And in there we're going to add an action. We can go to Window, Actions, and it's a classic. So you might actually see this like this. Since we're using 2.0, you're going to go to the one that says Global Functions, Movie Clip Control, and just double click on, or Timeline Control, excuse me, and double click on Stop. And that's the coding. Stop, parentheses, and then semicolon. You could have also typed it in, but that's cool. Now what is that going to do? Well, let me make this a little smaller. Or actually, let me just get the Actions window out of here. Or whatever. But anyway, there's the stop action. You see that little A there where I just added the stop? If I save this and I control test the movie, it stops. Perfect. Now it's waiting for the actions to make the buttons work. So we're going to go ahead and stop this right there. We'll continue this in part 2 of this lesson where we'll make the buttons work. Thanks a lot for watching.